Welcome to a new episode of the Game Changers podcast, where we feature the awesome people we have in this industry. And today I have a very special guest, someone who I had the pleasure to work with before, Bill Roper. I think it's a man who actually needs no introduction, but still I want to hand it over to him to give us a quick rundown of all the amazing games he's worked on and the projects and pretty much his entire journey in the games industry. So over to you, Bill, and take us
Thanks,
through.
Lars. Yeah, what a pleasure to be here. This is a lot of fun.
Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, this is my 30th year in the games industry. I get to celebrate a nice round number this year. Really fortunate to have had that opportunity. I started back in 1994. At that time, a little company called Blizzard Entertainment, where we launched Warcraft, Orcs, and Humans. That was the first project I got to work on. I started in the games industry doing voiceover and doing some writing and music. And I went from there to getting hired on full time. And my first actual work as an employee at Blizzard was to create the lore for the original Warcraft game. So basically, Alan Adham, who was the president at that time, walked in and said, you wrote that voiceover stuff you did, right? And I said, yeah. And he said, okay, well, all we really have is that there's orcs and they're fighting humans and the bad guy's name is Blackhand. And we have a bunch of missions and we need backstory and we need a manual. And so go do that. So, little did I know that would, that really fun sounding assignment, especially to someone who's kind of been a lifelong, game master on the tabletop side, would lead to a career where I got to work at Blizzard for 9 years, founded my own studio called Flagship Studios, where we did Hellgate London. Was the big game we launched there for 5 years. I went to Cryptic for a couple of years where I worked on Champions Online and Star Trek Online. Then I did a year of consulting where I got to kind of travel the world, did everything from going to Shenzhen, China to be a guest speaker and spend a week with the dev studios at Tencent, to writing a white paper for J.J. Abrams on thoughts on doing video games, what that might mean for him and Bad Robot. And that was pretty cool to actually, not that it necessarily had anything to do with what I told them I thought they should do, but when they started a studio, I just thought that was really awesome that he went forward with that idea. To joining the Walt Disney Company and being there for 5.5 years. That was amazing. Got to meet some incredible people, work with pretty much every license that ever meant anything to me growing up and as an adult, once they acquired Lucas while I was there. And Disney Infinity was the big thing we did while I was there. And then I spent a year in beautiful London, or a year and a half in London, where I was CCO at Improbable, which is a technology company for the games industry. Got to dip my toe in that side and came back and I'm doing startups, kind of in the serial startup setting right now. Did 3 years at a startup I co-founded called Author Digital, where we got to try to start up a company and survive through the pandemic. And that was a real experience. And
that's a tough one, yeah, for many.
Yeah, that was really hard when that's where we started kind of first meeting and talking. And then I was at a Web3 for a hot minute that I got recruited into. And now I'm starting up my own studio again. So I think that's the one thing that's been fantastic about this industry is that it's always changing. There's always something different. If I look at, 30 years ago, what I was doing, what the technology was, what was even possible, past what we were dreaming and trying to do, but what we could actually do and what we were having to create technology to be able to do. And then look at where we are today. It's remarkable. And it feels like every 5 years, we're in a completely new, business models or platforms allow us to do things or distribution models. Like there's just some major change that happens. And that's an exciting place to be.
And I think being in this industry for 30 years, of course, you have a tremendous amount of experience, but still it's very clear to me that you haven't lost the passion for this industry. I mean, even though there's ups and downs, in this industry, I think we all share one thing, and that is the love for games and, being part of this and working with the great people that we have. So it's great to see that, despite everything and that you've done already, there's still the hunger for more and now founding your own studio again. I mean, it's really cool to see. I don't personally have 30 years of experience, and some of the games you mentioned at the beginning, especially Warcraft, Orcs, and Humans, was among the first games that I played. So, I saw it from that side. But it's really cool to, of course, hear that you've worked on all of those and that it allowed you to form your career, which is really great. So if we talk a bit about all the things you worked on and think of the characters in there. I mean, if you've listened to other episodes of the podcast, then you might know I always ask this question about characters that feel special to the guests that I have on here. Is there any character, and with you it's almost cheating because you had so many in the Disney universe, but any character that stood out that you would love to have a real life conversation with, and who would that be and why?
Yeah, I mean it's pretty wild, right? Because I've had the opportunity to work with all the Marvel characters and all the Lucas characters and Star Wars and everything else. But there's I like to think that there's characters that that I have worked with and haven't created, and I would love to have the conversation with the character because I think it would give me even more insight to the person who created it. And even though I know Chris Metzen really well, like if I had an hour where I could sit down with Sarah Kerrigan / the Queen of Blades from Starcraft, right? I just think that was such a compelling character that Chris created. And one that I remember playing through the campaigns and then reading people's reactions when they played through the campaign, of when, that such a major moment happens for that character and goes through this just wholly unexpected moment and then transition and transmogrification. I think it'd be fascinating to talk to that character before and after,
Right.
and kind of go through and see how that experience actually changed them. I just think that it's a fascinating character. There's so much depth there that was presented, in the scope of a strategy game, where we did a lot of storytelling in those games through like mission briefings and mission recaps. And there was cinematics, and there were amazing cinematic sequences. But it was the kind of thing where, we weren't doing the depth and detail of storytelling in the way that like the Final Fantasy series would, or, like a lot of other games that really focused on that. We used our cinematics. We kind of kept the powder dry for like the big wow moments, like the big boom moments. And definitely there were some of those associated with Kerrigan, but I think there's a lot there that would have been really interesting to delve into. So that's who I would choose to go have an hour with, and then be grateful I escaped with my life at the end of the hour.
Just want to say, I mean, she was a bit of a difficult one probably to have a conversation with.
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, I still remember like the moment her transition became evident, and seeing that going on, and a lot of my friends actually had kind of a love-hate relationship with the character at the time, because that nobody expected it pretty much in the beginning. So that's a pretty good one. I really enjoyed the entire series as well, and Kerrigan was definitely a standout character and all of that. So if we move away from the characters a little bit into projects in general, and again, this may be a difficult question for you because you've seen so many different projects and we're shaping many of them. But is there anything that you haven't worked on in the past that somebody else did where you felt like I would have loved to work on that project?
Yeah, actually, there's so many games like that. I am very fortunate. I've got to work on a lot of different types of games. And genres or even platforms where they are. I really would love to have an opportunity to work on just a massive, this sounds maybe strange for me, but just one of those like massive single player narrative open world games. Like almost everything I've done has been multiplayer, which I love. But I play a lot of single player, very narrative story heavy games.
I just wanted to ask if you're like a multiplayer guy in private, or if you really
I do both.
Player.
I play way too many games, probably but that's where it is. I'm very lucky I get to work in the same thing I do as a hobby. So I work on games all day, and then I play games all night, and then I think about games when I sleep. And so it's just like games 24/7. But I love playing, just really big story driven games, and they can be very structured, like the Final Fantasy games. They can be very open world, like Bethesda's products, right? They can be like, I've probably played Dragon Age Inquisition more times than I can count, just because there's the differences in the story as I go through, and the changes that are there, and you don't play it for long enough, and then you're like, oh, I think I want to go back and do that again. And I think that there's something just really fascinating about that world building that occurs, where you have to make a world that feels alive and vibrant and interesting for me to go through without the benefit of that emergent play of other players, of other people being there, right? I think that's some of the excitement and the dynamic, and one of the things I really love about multiplayer games, that you do this different storytelling. I mean, it's not the ultimate kind of game I would want to build, but I would love to work on one. I know it sounds a little odd. Like, it's not like, oh man, if I could do that, then I'd be done. Like, there's a couple other things I would love to do, but having that opportunity, I think, would be amazing. I think just mainly because I've never really done that. I think we've always tried to inject a lot of story into multiplayer games. Through the Craft series, we always had a lot of story that was there through the campaigns, which were kind of designed to be single player, but the heart of those games is multiplayer gaming. When we went through the Disney Infinity games, the play sets, yes, they're kind of designed for single player, but you can play in multi too. I'm playing through a lot of those right now with my son. So I think that there's always been that background of there's multiplayer in the product, there's multiplayer in what you're doing, and that's always been a huge consideration. And it seems like the focus that is different, that is required to build a very deep and immersive single player experience would be something that would be really fun to go do.
Yeah, when I started in the industry about 15 years ago or so, I also started working on multiplayer games, and I've been doing that for like 10, 12 years. And then the first time I had this experience that you're talking about, like working on single player games, not necessarily as a designer or something, but at least working with the teams that made those games and supporting them. And it's a different beast. It's not better or worse. It's just very different, very different focal points in the development. And I truly enjoyed that. And, I was always more of a single player gamer in my own free time, even though I played hardcore WoW, so that's a different story. But the rest, it was a lot of single player games, also Dragon Age and so on. And I truly enjoyed seeing these games come to life when you cannot rely on the dynamics that come through multiplayer. And for many people in this industry, I have the feeling it's the other way around. They start on single player titles and then they get to experience the multiplayer components. For me, it was always like the other way, and it seems like it's a little bit similar for you.
Yeah. Absolutely.
So if we look into the games that you actually have worked on, and I'm curious here, is there any game that, because the experience was so great or working with a team was so great, that you would love to forget this, have it erased from your memories just so you could experience it again?
Wow. I love that question. I think that, there's definitely been that a couple of times. Warcraft 2, I've always maintained, was this kind of magical development. We did that game in 11 months. It dramatically changed things about how Warcraft worked from a systems standpoint. Like, mechanically, we made major changes in the gameplay. We moved from having to be locked down in how you built your settlements to roads to being, you can free build kind of anywhere that you want to, right? We gave the players a lot more freedom. We did things like adding land, sea, and air, not just land units. So we're adding as best we could in a 2D game, a three-dimensionality to things. We increased multiplayer. We went from 2 players to 8 players, right? I mean, there was like so much we did when you look at the difference of those products. And the fact that we did all of that in 11 months with a pretty small team still, and it felt like every decision we made was the right decision. We were like, let's try this, and it would work. Let's do this, and it worked. And the lore of the world expanded. Everything got bigger and richer and more beautiful and more connective. And it was one of those things where, at the end, you just looked at what had just happened in less than a year, and you were kind of, it was mind boggling. Like, how did we do that? How did that just happen? And, we work long hours and hard hours. I think Blizzard, for better or for worse, has always had that reputation as being a company where you put a lot of hours in on projects. It was no different at the beginning. We burned a lot of midnight oil. But it oddly never felt that way. Maybe because it was the game. Maybe it's because I was still young when I was doing it, and it was like, yeah, I don't care. I'll sleep on the floor of my office. Woohoo! But I would love to have that erased and then experience that again. Because I think it just, at the end, we didn't realize what we'd done and how we'd done it, and we were just a little amazed by it. And then the game, fortunately, just did fantastic. And there's that moment of it too, when you see all the hard work that happens, and then boom, there it is, and you're like, wow, people really like it. Oh my god, this is incredible. So I think like that continuity, that package would be amazing. And something I've done a lot more recently, I would love to go through and for the erase what happened and have the experience again, from I think working towards hopefully a different outcome. Because I'm assuming that I have the knowledge I have today, right? About the industry and things like that, would be with Hellgate London. We did a lot of innovative things with that product. I feel it was really ahead of its time in a lot of ways, both from a technology standpoint, a business model standpoint, what we were trying to do in terms of gameplay, and we just didn't quite get it. And some of it was just, we did things and didn't have the terminology on how to describe it. We didn't have the way to tell you what we were trying to do. And when we talked about it, we were clumsy. And then people got confused or upset by that. We tried a lot of different things in being very cutting edge or bleeding edge, including being one of the very first games on Games for Windows, doing in-game advertising, doing things that we were trying to do to stay alive as a studio that also, we always try to do it in a way that was respectful to the players. Even we did in-game ads. We built them into the world, and we told people that we're going to have their ads in our games. We are doing graphic treatments to them to make them look like they should be in a post-apocalyptic setting. It's not going to be a big, bright, shiny, poster. It's going to be behind cracked glass and everything. So it's still going to be there. People are still going to see it. And we're going to build technology to track where people are viewing it, so we can tell you how much time you're getting. We're going to give you all your metrics. But it's going to feel like it's part of the world. That was really important to us. But there was a lot of challenges with that. I mean, ultimately the studio shut down. I'd love to be able to have that reset, right? Have gone back in, had that excitement of the first time sitting in the leadership chair, right? It was the first entrepreneurial thing I'd ever done. I was CEO. I worked with an incredible team, and I think that's the biggest kind of warm fuzzy for me takeaway from it is almost every single person that was on that team, that was in that company, and at Flagship Seattle, which after we closed went on to become Mythos and to do Torchlight, right? So they stayed together and did that. But I still talk with a lot of those people, and everyone still says, that was just one of the best experiences I ever had working in a company. So I think there was a lot of really positive things that happened there. And I'd love to be able to go through and experience all that again and have that excitement of, how are we going to do this? We're trying to do things no one's ever done before. Can we figure that out? But hopefully have a lot more experience in my back pocket this time. So when we get to those places that were big stumbling blocks for us, I'd have different viewpoints on how to get over those hurdles.
I was definitely super excited when the game came out at the time, and I loved it. I played it. It was one of the most anticipated games for me. And if you ever, take a shot at trying this again, give me a call. I would love to be part of that team. Bring it back to life.
I will do so. I promise you, I'll do that, Lars.
I really enjoyed that. It was a really good one, and I also learned something new. I didn't know that Warcraft 2 only took 11 months to complete. That was new to me.
Yeah, I mean, if you go back and look at the release dates, it's like, wow, that was really tight. And I've gone back and thought about that a lot. And I used to actually have people that would get at Blizzard get upset when I would say, I just feel like that was magical. They're like, no, we're smart and we worked hard. And so I'm like, yes, and we got super lucky. You can look at the next stuff we did, right? We went to do Starcraft, and it was still smart people working really hard, and that game took a lot longer and was a lot harder, and maybe it's because we were moving from equal sides to doing 3 sides that were dramatically different. There was definitely increasing complexities that were there, but it was like a geometrically different and more difficult than it was for Warcraft 2. So there was just something about Warcraft 2. I don't know if it was because we just came off the other game. We just rolled right into it. We'd had all these ideas for the first game that we didn't do, and they kind of went into this file that was like, okay, here's what we do in a sequel. And then we just right away started working on the sequel. And maybe that was the secret to it, was that it was rolling right into it, and everybody still had that full head of steam. But yeah, it's crazy to think about how fast we did that and how well it was done.
Yeah, by modern comparisons, development times these days, everyone would call you crazy. We'd say, it takes us 11 months and it's going to be done. So, it's good to hear. So you've already talked about some cool moments in your career, talking about those games. I was wondering, are there any other Eureka moments in your journey through the games industry, some crucible moments where you realized that, you might want to approach things a bit differently after that than before?
Yeah, I think interestingly, every game has its own Eureka moment when that game is going to be great. With the original Warcraft, Orcs and Humans, it was the first time we had head-to-head play. And Ron Miller was in his office, Alan Haddad was in his office. They started a multiplayer game. After 5 or 6 minutes, they both came out of their offices. They're like, that was amazing. They were just so filled with energy and freaking out. Now, we were helped along by the fact that there was a desync error that had occurred. And so at some point, they both started playing as AIs, and they both won. So they both came out yeah, I kicked your butt. They're like, no, you didn't. What are you talking about? Which was then very funny and let us go fix that bug. But we knew right then it was people playing against each other. There was something electric in that. And that really set a tone for that studio moving forward. And for me in my career, like multiplayer, there's a magic that's in multiplayer that you can't get in just a single player game. And it's something I still play tabletop RPGs. I've been playing them since the 70s. There's a magic that is there when you are doing collaborative storytelling live with people, the back and forth that happens, that you don't get even in a video game, right? There's a back and forth and immediacy, and the fact that as a game master, you're altering things on the fly. You can just change your world like that. I don't have to worry about asset creation and did we code it up or anything. You can just do it, right? Because so much of it's in the imagination. But the multiplayer to me is the key aspect of that, right? It is you and other people doing those things. When we got to Starcraft, seeing what a big Eureka moment in that was, seeing how making a game could then change people's lives, in the real world. Getting to go to South Korea, going to PCBongs, talking with people that would say, we're so grateful that you came up with this game because it's so popular. I've been able to open 3 game rooms and I employ 30 people. And, it's let me, put money in people's pockets, esports, all these things that happen that are fundamental in those people's lives. And so, for me, that was always think about the player. What are people going to be able to do with this? How can you make it more accessible? How can you give them tools so they can do something with it? I mean, I think that was a huge part of Warcraft 3. right, was not only did we, again, kind of change up how the game was played, but we focused on providing, kind of the best tool set we could for people to build their own experiences. Started that in Starcraft, but I think really kind of perfected it in Warcraft 3. And out of that, we saw Dota. And then from that, League of Legends, and, the MOBA genre was born out of people being able to create their own experiences in that game. And so for me, that was like, how do you reward players' creativity? How do you encourage them to go out and do something in your game, whether it's being able to mod it completely or whether it's be able to do something in the game that contributes to the story, that changes the play space? How do you let them be a part of the storytelling in a meaningful way? I think every time you go through in a game, you see those moments. In Diablo, the first one, we went from turn-based, which is what that game was originally. It was very much like XCOM in the way it was being executed, if people remember that game. We even had the little phone booth, and you'd put your motion points in, and your character would move. And we went through, and I was demoing it to the studio, because I was the senior producer on it, or exec producer on it at that time. And I was down in Irvine working with the team up in Northern California, and we showed it to the studio. And Alan, I remember, said, like, "Hey, is there a reason we're not doing this in real time? Like, instead of turn-based, why isn't this real time?" And I said, well, we talked a little bit about that openly in front of the whole studio. And then Alan just said, like, "Hey, is everybody here who thinks this should be real time?" And like everybody puts their hands up except Bob Fitch, one of the engineers. And I remember I said, "Bob, why don't you think it should be in real time?" And he's like, "Well, I don't know how I would control a party of RPG characters." It's like, "I know how I control armies in real time, but how do I control like a party of 6 people?" And I said, "Oh no, you don't do that in Diablo. You have one hero." And he's like, "Oh, well, yeah, then real time." So
his hand went up,
yeah. So his hand went up. Alan and I go and get on the phone and call Dave Brevik up at Condor at that time, and said, "We think the game should be real time." And we had a long discussion about why that was going to be really, really hard and really expensive, and he's have to rewrite the whole engine. And he's doing what every independent developer should do, is like, my publisher wants a major change. How do I make sure that I don't wipe out my company trying to do that? Because I'm going to need more budget and more time. And but he said, "Look, I'll go talk with Eric and Max and the team about it. And we'll see what we can do." And about, I think, 2 days later, Dave calls us back, exhausted because he hasn't slept, because he's done it. He's like,
wow,
got the game to work real time. And he said for him, the first time, and he had a I think it was the barbarian or the fighter. It was probably the fighter. I haven't had the barbarian yet. The fighter and a skeleton. Because in the minute he clicked on the skeleton, the fighter walked over, swung his sword, and the skeleton like fell apart and everything. He was like, that was it. I knew that was the game, right? It was like, it was so visceral and so exciting and so in the moment. And so, out of that, it was like, oh yeah, I could never go back to turn-based. Like real time.
Somehow I have a feeling it was a great decision in hindsight.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. Also, it not being claymation was a good decision. There was a lot of things that was different about that game when it first got pitched. But I think there's those Eureka moments happen, in the context of development after a product comes out and you see what happens. And even in the last thing that's kind of in my mind is how you interact with the team. Right? Like there's so much learning you can have, and having those moments where you're like, oh, this is the way to work with a group of people. This is the way to, manage relationships. And I think that is a kind of a constant growing, that everyone who's ever in a leadership role, you can take all kinds of courses and read all kinds of books, but actually doing it and finding out what works for you, what's your particular path that's effective, and out of all of that, for me over the years has, given me a lot of like kind of mantras almost that I hang stuff on, like, it's always about trust and respect. right? You gain that with your team. You gain that with people that you're working with outside of your company. If you're working with an IP, you gain that with the IP holder. There has to be a trust and a respect that's there. Discuss, debate, decide, and align. Like there's all these little things that feel like you've pulled them out of a drawer somewhere, and like here's my next thing that I say. But they're hard won Eureka moments, right? And when it's like, look, if we all can agree at the beginning of a process that when a question comes up, when a challenge arises, when we're trying to make a big decision that there's not immediate agreement on it, we're going to discuss what the issue is. We're going to open it up for debate. I want to hear everybody's side, right? And what we should do, shouldn't do, the ups, the downs, the pluses, the minuses. But then a decision is going to get made by whoever the decision maker is. And if it's me, then ultimately I'm going to decide based on that information. And then the expectation is that everyone on the team aligns behind the decision, right? And that's whether you thought that was the right idea at the beginning, whether you thought it was a terrible idea and your idea was the better one, or whether nobody's happy because you've reached some compromise, right? But whatever the answers that you get to, when the decision is made, you align behind it and you work 100% to make that actually happen. I learned that specifically in that way of thinking about it from Jimmy Pitaro when he took over as president at Disney Interactive. Jimmy put that out as like, here's how I like to run things. And I was like, oh, it's so concise. It makes so much sense. And I've used that there and since then as a way to try to frame having those difficult discussions that happen during game development, right? And it always comes with that context. And this is something all the way back from starting at Blizzard, which was it's always about the game, right? It's never personal. You never attack people, right? You can attack an idea. You can say, this is why I don't think this idea will work, as long as you're doing it in a respectful way, right? Because you built that trust up with the other person. But it's never, I think you're a this, or, you always come up with a dumb idea or whatever it is, right? Because at the end, you want to have that vigorous discussion around things. You want to, shoot holes in people's proposals to make sure that it's as bulletproof as it can be. And then you want to go out afterwards and have a pint and be friends and see a movie and have someone over your house for a barbecue, because that's not what it's about, right? It's about how do you put the product through the crucible and put it under a microscope to make it the best game that you can.
And I think as a leader, it's your role to provide that safe space for people to speak up, but also in a way demand this alignment afterwards. There's two things that come to mind for me. First of all, I always give this as a piece of advice to young development teams as well. Sometimes they come and say, like, we like to do design by committee, and they say, like, well, I'm not a big fan of that. Usually it doesn't work that well. Of course, you have a debate, you talk about it, but in the end, you need to align on something that you believe in. And the other thing I always do when I talk to new studios, I usually like to ask people about the vision of the game. And if I talk to 10 people and I get 20 different answers about what the vision of the game is, then I know there's an issue with the alignment on what the product should be. So I think that's kind of supporting what you just said. I think it's super important that people feel they have the opportunity to contribute, but they also accept the fact that somebody's got to make a decision for creating the best possible version of the game in the end.
Yeah, and the safe space is the perfect way to put it, right? It's the fact that it's like, I've always had an open door policy. It's like, you can come and talk to me anytime. Now I've got an open Discord policy, I guess, so we're working remotely at the new studio. But it's always like, you can talk to me about anything whenever you want to talk to me about it, right? And look, a lot of people say that, and a lot of times you go to a studio and you hear that. And it's with varying degrees of sincerity or excellence of execution, and again, that's where earning people's trust and respect comes into play, right? After a while, people will realize, like, no, they can do that. I'm being earnest in saying that. I'm going to listen to what you have to say. That doesn't mean you will change my mind necessarily, but I want you to know that you're being heard. Right,
exactly. That's the most important. People don't expect to have all their ideas put in the game, but what they do expect is if they have a valid concern, if they have a contribution, that it's listened to. And as long as you can provide that, I think most people, as at least my experience, most people will be happy, and they will look for those environments working with people that have that same mindset, like the one you described right now, because that's ultimately the environment, I think, in which creativity can thrive. If you don't have this, then you probably work for like a bank or something. But in this industry, I think this is what you need to learn. And I'm always surprised how many people, quite frankly, still don't get this. They don't get that it needs to be a discussion, but there also needs to be a decision. So it goes both ways.
Right. So I think a lot of people think that's linear, right? Or that's exactly. Not linear. That's binary.
Yeah,
right.
Exactly.
Where it's like, no, either everybody talks about it, everybody decides, and somehow it happens, or one person makes the decision and there's never a discussion about it. Yeah. Right. And it's a happy conjoining.
At least if you want to reproduce the success that you had on a project, or increase the likelihood of succeeding again. Of course, there's always the lucky shots where like there's one person deciding everything, and it makes for an amazing game. And then there's like the big failures, also based on like designed by committee or by one person running it. But I think if you want to reproduce it, if you want to create something sustainable, then that, from my point of view, at least the only way. So I fully agree with what you said there. So I want to talk a bit for the remainder of the episode, talk about the present and the future. So of course, the games industry right now is in a bit of an interesting state. So I was wondering if you see any particular challenge in this industry right now that you would like to tackle, either personally or what that you would like to see change over the next years or so. There's so much going on at the moment, but is there anything that you would like to focus on and that worries you the most?
I think we're in this, to me, disturbing time of having a dichotomy of amazing games coming out, driving massive profits, companies making as much or more money than they have ever made, and then laying off thousands and thousands and thousands of people and closing small studios, having the people that are doing the work and being creative pay for the sins of overinvestment or poor corporate management, whatever it is. And I'm out fundraising right now, so maybe I'm shooting myself in the foot, but I am a radically transparent and very candid person. And it's not that because necessarily any of those people doing that are bad people, right? It just feels like we're in a system that's badly damaged, if not broken. And we have to figure out a way as an industry to be better to the people that actually work in that industry, right? Long hours, a lot of times it's not for fantastic pay, right? I think for as long as I've been in games, there's a level of advantage that gets taken over people that work in the industry because we are passionate. It's always talked about, like, you have to have passion, right? Like, was that person passionate enough about games when you're interviewing somebody? Even we started talking, you're saying like, hey, I can still see the passion you have for this. Yeah, because most of us that get into it, do it because we love it. Like we love games. We want to make games. We want to do something that then you share with the world and makes them happy and is interesting and engaging and, activates their mind and, brings in these moments of excitement and joy. And that is what feeds us as well. It's very similar in a lot of ways to being a musician, which I also am. So there's this feedback loop of you get like, I created a thing and people really loved it. And that gives me a bunch of energy and I want to go make more things. But I think that, on the whole, the games industry takes advantage of that because they're like, look, you get to work on this property. You get to make a video game. You get to live out your passion. So I'm going to pay you less money and work you longer hours. And then possibly, just let you go at the end without ever having told you that's the way it's going to work. Right. And it's interesting because we're not the only industry that does that, but we do it very differently. And I think more destructively to the talent than, for example, the films industry does, right? Films are, here's a big project. We bring a bunch of people on. They work really hard. At the end of the project, they're let go, right? That's a very common cycle.
Yeah.
And the companies you have are the production companies that have a small group of very creative people and business drivers that then build these big teams up to do a project, and then they do this big flux back and forth, right? And we do a lot of that in video games as well. We do outsourcing, we hire in contractors, but I think the big difference is a lot of times people get brought in on a game, they get hired as a full-time employee, they work for years on that game, and then they're just unceremoniously dumped. And that's not what they believe is going to happen when they're hired, right? They're not brought in as a contractor. They're not told, hey, you know what, we're going to hire you. You're going to be here for 2 years. And then there's a likelihood, if not a guarantee, you will not have a job after that. Because part of the other trick that happens, right, is and this one makes me a little crazy, and I used to do it, and I work very hard not to do it. People are like, oh, well, now you're part of the family. Huh. And we use this word that has a deep meaning to people.
I actually never do, by the way, because I hate using family for like a business environment.
Right.
You know?
Yeah, I mean, you could say, hey, you're part of the team, you're part of the company. You know, the way that we think of our employees and we treat people, you know, is the highest standards. Here's what we do. But ultimately, it's a business, right? Yeah. And there are hard decisions people that run a business make. I've had to make them, having to lay people off, having to do things. And I will say that I have been on management teams that have not always done that well. And I'm still angry at ourselves for when it's not done right.
Yeah.
But I think it's very different when that happens to you for a business reason. A company has to contract, right? In the instance where it has to happen, when they've told you you're family. Now it's much more personal. Now it's like, well, how can you do that to me, right? And I also think that there's, you know, other elements that contribute to that. Like, it takes a while for people to understand, like, HR is not your friend, right? HR is there to protect the company. They're there to help the employees. They're there to implement policies that are put in place by a company that hopefully are designed for the betterment of employees. But ultimately, at the end of the day, they're employed by the company, and they're there to protect the company, right? So I think that's another thing where people get this thing where, like, oh man, my HR person, like, they're there for me. They, like, I know they're the person in the company that's in my corner, and it ultimately they're not. And I know a lot of HR people, and I love them, right? But it still took me a while to realize, like, right, ultimately, if push comes to shove, you can't be on my side, even if you want to, right? Because that's not your job, right?
I mean, it was part of my role until recently, you know, to work with people, and you know, I felt I'm in their corner for a long time. But like you said, when push comes to shove, and you have to meet certain goals, and you know, it won't work without letting people go, then you can't be on their side. And
I think
there's a few people that understand, but there's some that still have this illusion that it could be different, and that, of course, is very, very difficult then to navigate for both sides. Actually,
it is. It's so hard, right? And these are hard things, and some of these are, you know, the I'll use big quotes, you know, the realities of business. But at the same time, there's things at a meta level that it feels like we should be working as an industry to figure out how to address, right? Mm-hmm. Like, people get angry, like, understandably, when you're like, wow, did you have to close that studio on December 17th? Mm-hmm. Like, could you have not done it earlier or done it later, right? Like, you know, timing, when you have to make hard decisions, like, timing is really important, right? Like, I have worked places, and then I get people in trouble. I won't say who it was or where it was, but I worked somewhere where that was doing reductions, and I volunteered to get reduced because I was like, you know, I can tell you need some big savings in this group, and I know I have a high salary, and I've got some other things that are happening, and maybe it would make sense if I was on that list. But they knew it was going to happen near a time that would be difficult for people. And so the head of that group specifically delayed when it was going to happen, right? Made the decision, did the cost analysis, and said, ultimately, the extra, X thousands of dollars that it costs us to keep people employed for an extra 2 or 3 weeks is better than letting them go before this event happens, because it's just not right to do it, right? And that's just a different mindset, right?
And I wish more people had that. I mean, we saw it now at the end of last year that it seems like not a lot of people had it. And quite frankly, I had to make some tough calls as well due to the pressure. And, I would have wished we didn't have to do this before, like the holiday season, for example, because it makes it so much harder for people to find new jobs. I mean, ultimately, it's one of the reasons why I started this podcast series, because I want to, shine the spotlight on some of the people that are affected by those measures, not only within the group I was working for, but also in other areas of the industry. And I think if we can avoid this by being smart about it, and also remembering that we might want to work with some of those people in the future again, and we rather want to have them on our side in that case, that would be the better move than just look at the short-term gain and forget about what it means for the long run.
And I think that there's something to be said, because there's kind of, if you put it in big blocks, right, you've got independent studios or studios that aren't owned by someone, they're not part of a corporation, that don't have shareholders, right? They could be of various sizes. And then you've got companies that have shareholders or massive investments, or, and there are different considerations they make. But like, I've been at startups where we had to close down. I'll use Flagship as an example. We got to a point where we weren't making enough money on the game after we launched it. There could be a whole podcast on just what happened with Flagship, but to make it very short, at the end, we kept trying to extend our runway, right? Because we felt we were very close to signing a deal that would then be that story where, we were on the ropes, and we're just about, we were ready to crash and burn, and like everything was coming off the plane, but we managed to land it because we got this last minute investment, and it didn't happen. But one of the things that people didn't realize, and we let people go, and it came across as very sudden, right? I will say we didn't do a great job of telling people, like, hey, here's where we are, things are tight. We didn't let people go because we were told by the investment bankers we were working with, if you start seeing a big reduction in your workforce, your company is not as valuable because you're losing the talent that's there, and you're trying to sign this deal, right? So to try to have the right outcome, we did some things wrong, I think, in retrospect, right? We should have told people more ahead of time this is happening. But the thing we didn't tell people that we did is, for the last 6 weeks that company was open, the founders paid everyone's salary out of pocket. And from a personal standpoint, that was very destructive to my long-term financial health. There's a reason that after 30 years, other than the fact that I'm really passionate and love games, that I'm still working, because I can't really retire, right? But for us at that point, like, that was the right decision. We're like, look, we're trying to get there. I think we had 17 documents in escrow. Like, we were, that close to signing this deal, and we're like, we got to keep everybody here. All right, let's just figure out what our weekly burn is. How much can we just put back into the company? And anyone who runs a company will tell you that's the stupidest idea ever. Never put money in at the end, right? Always at the beginning, never at the end. But we really believed in the team. We really believed in what we wanted to do as a company, and we really believed we were going to get this deal done. So we put our personal stake in that. Right.
And sometimes you don't believe it's the end. So if you truly believe you can make it work, and that's probably what happened at the time, So now, of course, in hindsight, it would have been better to not do it. But
sure,
at the time, you believed so much in it. So I totally understand why you did it.
Yeah, and those are the times where you look at it and you're like, well, we should have let people go, like for the health of the company, right? Because maybe you could have hired them back or different things. But I think the thing that doesn't happen, and I'll kind of finish with this, and this is much, much, much easier if you are at a smaller company, at an independent company, and becomes incredibly difficult, if not impossible, if you're at a large company or a publicly traded company, is to be absolutely as transparent as possible with your team, right? These people are adults. You've hired them in because they're professionals. right? And we have to get over this mindset of like, I have to hide things from my team. I have to like make up production dates because I know they're going to slip anyway. And so, if I tell them, hey, this thing's due on March 25th, actually it's not due until April 12th. But I tell them March 25th because I know they're going to screw it up. Right. And then all that does is train your people. Oh, whatever date they tell you, just add 3 weeks.
Yeah.
Right. And then when you actually give them a date and then they don't make it and you're shocked. It's like, well, of course they didn't. You trained them to not trust you and believe you. Right. So there's as much as you can tell people, like, this is what's happening. This is how we're doing things. This is where the company is. Right. Especially in a small company. I think people will be surprised by how responsive people are to that. Not only in their day to day, but they'll say like, hey, if we're running into like money problems, my partner works and I could work at half pay right now.
Yeah.
Right. Like, and maybe people in the company, of their own volition contribute because they also see the greater potential. And now, as opposed to trying to figure out how to do this all on your own, right? You don't make the game all on your own. You make the game as a team. Maybe there's answers as a team, but you can't come to those. You can't have those discussions and make those decisions, right? And get behind them unless everybody actually knows what's going on.
100%. I mean, this is something I learned as well, and I try to be very candid with people on the team. Sometimes, as you said, in a publicly traded company, you can't be super transparent about everything, but you can at least be honest with people. And the moment you can really communicate something without risking everything, then you should do it and trust the people you have on the team, because this is ultimately, I believe, long-term relationships and working with people for a long time. And I've had the pleasure of having people that I worked with in the past join me again in different roles. And I think this is only possible if they know they can trust you in providing them with the info they need and inviting them to contribute. So when you said as a team, you sometimes can have more ideas on how to solve a situation, I'm in full agreement with that, because this really is what leads to outcomes that you might not think of yourself. And that's why I always say, if you can share the info that's there, try to make them part of the solution and not part of the problem by hiding stuff from them. So I wish that all the leaders in this industry would hear this right now. So I hope as many as possible do, because this is really important lesson that I think we both learned here, that this is how you should work with a team if you want to create that long-term success. So if we look into the future as the final part and talk a bit about Lunacy Games, the company you've founded right now. So I'm wondering, what's your dream for that? I'm not expecting you to talk about the project you're working on right now. I know you can, but I'm just curious, like, what's the ambition with Lunacy Games, and how do you want to make it a reality?
Well, with those of us that are starting up this endeavor, we're all longtime industry vets. We've all started companies before. We've, worked at startups. We've worked at big companies. I think the biggest thing for us is wanting to start a company that, lives up to a lot of the things we've just talked about, right? For this last chunk of time. Like having that kind of radical transparency with our teammates, right? Making sure that they understand like what we're there for, why we're doing it, what our goals and ambitions are, making them a part of the process. And importantly, making, a game that we would love to play. And, as we've started talking with potential partners on this, or we talk with people that we want to bring into the studio, a lot of how we're approaching how we want to run the studio, the kind of game that we're making, is born out of not only our long-term experiences, but our recent experiences, coming out of the height of COVID, right? Like we learned we had how to run a studio remotely. We hate the big RTO push that's happening now, where everybody's like, oh, okay, well, everybody's got to get back in that office. It's like, is that because you really think that that's how you make better games? Or is that because you've got a big lease that, from a corporate standpoint, you're angry that no one's sitting in this office you're paying a bunch of money for? So damn it, let's get people back in there. Is it middle management that's upset because their job is to walk around and make sure people are working? And like, so they're like, I need to job justification. So people got to get back in an office so I can make sure they're working. It's like, well, they're working. They've been working for the last 3 years. Products are still coming out. We've got some of the best games in probably a decade, easy, that came out this last year. The majority of which was built during when people couldn't be together. So, I mean, that comes down to each company, and I understand that and how they feel that. But for us, we have found that it helps us as individuals, it helps us as a team. And when we go and talk to people, we can just get a much broader range and diversity if we don't have to require people be in the same physical space. Right? We can have team members from around the US, from around the world. That would be, in the old days, pre-2020, it'd be like, no, you got to move, and you got to move here if you want to be a part of this company. You have to disrupt your life. You have to uproot everything to come here and do this. And it's so much nicer now to be able to say, we'd love to have you be a part of the team. Where are you? That's great. That's fantastic. Happy you're there. You must love it if that's where you've chosen to live, right? Because you can stay there. And that means a lot to people. I think people have gotten used to not having to get in a car or get on the metro, or the underground for, 30, 60, 90 minutes plus to get to their job and then to get home again. And there's just we always talked about work-life balance. And it's like, wow, what's the best work-life balance for people that want to do it? Let them not have to spend half their time in a car, right? I mean, for us, in terms of the games we want to make, and again, this comes out of what we did and what our experiences were, is we really came to have this affinity and passion for cooperative games, for collaborative games, I mean, we've always loved multiplayer, but games that encourage and reward players for being creative, that allow them to be a part of the story, to do things in the world that actually have impact and meaning. And so that's kind of any of the game designs we've worked on and thought about, and the ones that we talked to people about last year, and some new stuff that we're going to talk to people about this year at our conferences that are just around the corner from when we're recording this, at DICE and GDC and things, all center around the fact that, we want to build these worlds that are rich and engaging, and people want to be in and want to have stories happen in. We want to reward their creativity and encourage it and give them ways to be a part of that world in a meaningful way. And we love collaborative and cooperative games. I think part of that too, again, real candidly, for me, I watched what happened to me when I was spending massive amounts of time on social media, being pulled into, politics and this like, I don't know, global movement of division, right? Where it's like, and because in social media, extremism is what is rewarded. So you get your clicks and your likes and your shares and your, all those warm, fuzzy things that you get that crank your endorphin up by being really radically one side of an argument or another. It's all about engagement. People really, really love what you're saying or really, really hate what you're saying. And that drives your numbers up. And what I found is that when we started playing games that we wanted to make, it's like, I don't want to do that. Like, I don't want to play a game right now in my life, or make one where the ultimate goal of the game is to beat someone else, right? To be on the opposite side of someone else. Yeah. Like, I want to make a game where my ultimate goal is, let's get together and do something amazing. So that's maybe just some way that the real world has influenced, what we're doing. And the last thing is, we talked a lot about, I think, when anybody starts a studio, what are we going to call it? What's it going to be? What does that mean? And so for us, it was kind of two things with Lunacy. It's multi-layered in that. I think one is, for us, when we started it, we were all kind of moonlighting, right? We were all doing this, like, let's start this while we're still working our day jobs, and let's, do this on the side. And there are still, people in the company that have day jobs, and, they do this in their after hours, or we know they're going to be a part of the team, when we're funded, and then, maybe they can make that decision on where they want to be. But it's always been this kind of, it started kind of working at night, on these projects and doing that. And I think the other thing too is, kind of have to be a little crazy to go start up a new company.
Oh yeah,
it doesn't hurt, because you're rolling big dice. You have no idea if it's going to work or not work, if people are going to like what you want to do or not do. It's really changing. I think the absolute biggest difference this time around going out and talking to people is, you used to be able to, what we always said, like, you have a team and a dream, right? And a sexy deck, you could probably get some funding. And now it's like, nah, people got to see something, right? You got to have a demo. You got to have something they can actually, and I think part of that is it helps with understanding what it is you want to try to do as a project. Again, candidly, I think a lot of investors got burned over the last 3 years by investing in teams and dreams and sexy decks. And then it was like, oh, you actually don't know how to make a game and you can't deliver, and where did all my money go? Right. And I think that's something we try to reduce that risk for partners we talk to, because we have an established team. We have people that have done this and launched a lot of games over a lot of years that have made a lot of money. And we know what we're doing. And we come in with, like, here's all our numbers. Here's our hiring plan. Here's everything on, here's our business model. Like, we try to present a really complete package. And I think for us, the hard part has been like, oh, that's all amazing. Please come back when you have a demo, right? So none of that still was enough to get it off. So, for us, the exciting part is we've been working on that. And, this year at the conferences, we're going to start actually showing people what it is we've been talking about. So, and it's a little wild, I've been around the industry for a long time. I'm still pumped to get out there. I'm still excited about what we're doing. I think that even though our industry is changing, and, who knows what's going to happen with, with where AI might take us at this point, for better or for worse. I come down on the for worse side, but I think there's ways with any tool, you figure out how to use it in a positive way that, isn't predatory. And I think that's, a lot of the considerations we've made. We're looking at, like, what's out there and what's going to be there, and where is the games industry going to be in, 1, 2, 5, 10 years? And how do we make sure that what we're doing, takes advantage of those things without taking advantage of the people that are there? So, maybe we're crazy. Maybe we're not, like, I've never been one to jump on the hot thing just because it's hot, right? Like, oh, Web3, let's do it. Like, to me, it didn't make sense. And I worked at a Web3 company for a while to try to understand it, and I came in as the acknowledged skeptic. And, I think that there were things they were trying to do that made sense, but the kind of the core of what it is, not that company at all, just the core of, like, what that's all about, I still don't really get it. Right. And maybe I'm, I know that proponents of it will talk to me all day about it. I'm like, oh, but I still don't really understand what you're getting out of this. I can see where there are things, for example, with generative AI that are positive, but I think there's a lot of negatives too, and so how you use it specifically is vital, as opposed to just like, yeah, we use it as a part of our workflow. So I think that's the thing for me that's interesting, is to look at, where are we now? Where are we going to be? How do you build something, to me, that has foundations that are incredibly solid, that will stand the test of time, but have twists and innovation within them? And I think if you go back and look at the games that I've worked on, you will see that. You will see where it's like, oh, what was Diablo? Well, it was an ARPG. Wow, that was really radically different. Well, yes and no. It wasn't what RPGs were doing at the time, but it had its roots in Angband and Moira, right? And it's like, there were, that concept of what that core game would be existed and was proven. We just did it in this 2.5D that wasn't done, because when, Diablo came out in this action RPG, RPGs were parties of people in a turn-based dungeon crawl, and like it was very specific what it meant, and it was really fading as a genre. And we were like, no, we're going to build an RPG, but we're going to build it like this over here. And yes, we did build a lot of tech and do a lot of things that were different, but it still had its roots in acknowledged, understandable gameplay, right? Like that's Blizzard's secret sauce if they've got one. Take a game genre that is established. How do we do something interesting on top of that people aren't expecting, right? And then, well, that's crazy. I mean, if you look at Pal World out right now, take something that's established, right? Go collect cute critters. Oh, let's put guns on top of it and make it much more adult, right? And do other weird stuff like eat your pals and collect humans, like, you know, do all those things that in the back of your mind, if you're candidly a Pokemon player and you're a little twisted, you're like, what if we did this weird stuff with it? That's their twist. Game's super successful. Now, that's not always going to work, right? The model's not that simple, but I always think that when you look at a game, you can look at it and you can see the foundation that's there, right? Whether, even if you look at something as crazy as Rocket League, right? And you're like, but that's wild. That's cars hitting giant soccer balls around. It's like, yeah, it's soccer. It's footy.
Yeah.
The weird twist is that I do it with a car, right? I mean, and they did a lot of iterations to get there. So for us, and it's like, what is the foundation to build off of? What's the thing we're going to do that's going to make it really interesting and really different, right? Where people are going to have an experience that is going to feel unique to what we present, right?
Well, I'm certainly very excited to see, what you have in store, and I know the announcement is going to happen very soon. So, then we can talk about it, and see where it goes.
Yeah.
Bill, I want to thank you so much for an amazing episode. Usually these episodes run like about 30 minutes, and one of our guests said that it takes about as long as like washing the dishes for him. So, Sam, this is a shout out to you. So this time, if you listen to the episode I had with Bill right now, you probably need to wash your neighbor's dishes as well or something. But I don't care. It was an amazing conversation. Bill, thank you so much. All the best for Lunacy Games and whatever comes your way. Certainly enjoyable off talking to you. And, I hope I get to see you soon. I hope all the listeners of this episode and the watchers enjoyed it as well. And, stay tuned for the next ones. This was a special extended one. So we'll see. The next one's probably going to be a bit shorter again. But thanks again so much, Bill. It was a pleasure.
Great. Thank you, Lars. What a pleasure. I know we talked when we started like 30 minutes, Bill, let's be crisp. And I was like, God, I talk way too much for this show. But I'm glad we did it, and hopefully people enjoyed it.
Absolutely. Thank you.